Today I'm going to be making Cockatrice rice from Delicious in Dungeon. There are quite a few different monster parts that get used for this recipe, and one of them is the cleaner brick. But there's a bit of a problem with the cleaner brick. Since those things don't exist in real life, I'm going to be making something a little bit different to hopefully accomplish the same thing. I thought this dish was super interesting. To start off, I'm going to be making a little bit of a pie crust. This is just a savory tart or quiche recipe, and in my bowl I have 1.5 cups of flour, followed by 10 tablespoons of cold unsalted butter, about 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and I'm just going to pulse this until it gets nice and crumbly. Some of you in the comments, you know who you are, mentioned that I used things that I shouldn't have used. I don't know about you, but I can't get dryad fruit. It's not a thing. Making this as close as I can to the anime is the goal. So I have 1 whole egg that's going to be going into this for our dough, along with 2.5 tablespoons of ice water, plus a little bit more if I need it. Now I'm gonna give this a quick whisk, and this is just going to go right on top of our flour and butter mixture. Now we just mix this until it comes together. If it doesn't come together within the first 20 or 30 seconds, stop. You don't wanna go too long because then the butter will actually start warming up, and instead I'm gonna add another 1/2 tablespoon of water. See that? Literally just 1/2 tablespoon of water starts turning it into dough. Now once it starts to form, stop it. That's it. You really don't want to overwork quiche or tart or pie dough, really any kind of butter-based dough. The more you overwork the dough, the less flaky and tender it is. So instead, I'm just going to gently bring this together, not putting too much effort into it, otherwise you form too much gluten and the butter starts to melt. And I'm gonna be baking them in this. So I'm going to kind of guess as to how much I need to get that shape. I think I'm gonna cut this into thirds just to make it a little bit easier later. You can kind of combine all of it into one if you're gonna make one big tart or quiche, but since I'm making smaller ones, it's just easier to cut it up now. Give them a little pat down, and once they're pucks, these are ready to go. I'm gonna be wrapping each of these in a bit of plastic, just so that way once they're wrapped up, these are gonna sit in the fridge for about 30 minutes while we work on everything else. This allows the butter to get nice and cold again, and it allows the gluten in that flour to relax. And also, you can make this the day before. You can actually make this a week before and throw it in the freezer, and they freeze really well. Like, I actually have a couple of portions that are frozen, and anytime I wanna make a tart or a quiche, I just grab one of these and let it thaw for the night before. Now, if you're venturing into a dungeon, you might need something to wear because it gets cold down there. That's why this portion of the video is sponsored by Into the AM and their amazing up to 60% off sale. From November 13th to December 8th, you can get up to 60% off store-wide at intotheam.com. Pick from some of their amazing looking graphic tees that I wear all the time, or some of their new flannels, because this thing is super soft and it's like pretty warm, and it might be too warm to wear in the house, but it's really cozy and I just kind of want to wear it. And the best part, if you use my link down below for Into the AM, you're also gonna get 10% off just for using my link, in addition to all the crazy sales that are happening on the store. Thank you to Into the AM for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now I'm gonna take this off because it's warm. Now, one of the pieces that Senshi uses in the anime for this dish is dryad fruit. This technically looks like a pumpkin, but the problem that I have is that pumpkin is fine, but I like acorn squash better. Also, this is really in season right now and it's delicious, and it's one of my favorite squash varieties. Like I said, dryad fruit doesn't exist. Acorn squash we can get, especially out here in the PNW. Acorn squash has a very tough skin. There we go. The only reason why I'm trimming the stem is to make sure it can sit a little better on my cutting board. And then we're going to cut this bad boy right in half. Oh yeah. Imagine if this were the dryad fruit itself and it's just, I can't make a, it's just crying and dying. One thing you can do is save the seeds and you can toast these later. Since I don't need them right now, I'm actually just going to put them in a small container, and I'll toast these with some salt and pepper and just have them as a snack. You can use them as a topping for a soup, which is really nice too. And now for the acorn squash, it looked like he had it diced up. This is the scene where Senshi, I keep saying Senji because I want to say Senshi. This is where Senshi dices everything up, stir fries it together, but because squash or pumpkin actually does really need to be roasted to have the best flavor and texture, I'm going to roast this first, and then we're going to saute it up later. I'm gonna first slice this into, I don't know, like 1/2-inch slices. You know, you do you, boo-boo. You know, like I say with all the time, keep playing with your food, but also now that I'm deep into cooking with chaos, it's like my mantra. But I think this is gonna be the best course of action for this dish. Why did I move those there? Just put all of them over there, Paul. Now, once they're kind of cut up like this is where I'm going to start roughly dicing them. So it looks similar to what Senshi had made. I'm I'm actually not gonna chop up the rest of this because I like roasting them whole like this. They become super meaty, really tender. It's a very different texture when they're cooked in bigger pieces than smaller pieces. So I'm gonna have this for like a dinner later at some point. Also, this sounds super basic. Now, since they were in a dungeon, they really didn't have many spices to work with. So I'm going to more or less be very basic with this. Do a bit of salt, just a pinch, because I believe Senshi had salt. I don't think he had black pepper, but I'm adding black pepper, okay? This is 1 ounce of monster discharge that's going to help lubricate all of the vegetable. Then we just give this a quick toss, get all those spices coated all over the vegetable. Well, dryad fruit. Get a sheet tray, line it with a bit of aluminum foil. This goes into the oven, 350. Till it's tender, I don't know, 20 minutes. While the acorn squash is in there roasting, we're gonna roll out our dough because we actually have to approach this kind of differently than maybe you would a normal tart or quiche recipe, only because I have to blind bake this. What blind baking means is we're going to cook the dough or the crust and then fill it. There's actually a very important reason for this. Since this is going to be filled with like our barley egg mixture, we're not going to cook it again in the oven. So this needs to be pretty cooked before we fill it. Does that make sense? It'll make sense. The goal is like, if you were serving this in a restaurant, how could you serve this relatively quickly? I think if you had a couple of these dough pieces rolled out, baked, ready to go, you just have to add the filling. And the filling is going to take no time at all. So I'm just rolling this pretty much to like 1/4 inch thick. And I'm gonna spray down this liner. Even though this is non-stick, I'm still gonna spray it down just a little bit. Hopefully there's no sticking at all. Take our beautiful crust and lay it on the inside, trying to make sure that it goes all the way to the top. The goal is to also make sure that it's completely flat on the bottom. And then any of this excess, I'm just gonna trim right off the edge. And we can just bake this and throw some salt on it and just have it as a snack. And this is what the inside looks like now. Nice and lined, ready to go. Hopefully it stays this way. Take a piece of parchment paper, place this into the mold. You can use dried beans or rice here. I'm using some dried red beans that I had laying around, and I'm just going to pour these into the bottom. This prevents the bottom from puffing up because since it's not filled, there's gonna be air pockets that are happening, and you want a little bit of weight that holds that dough down. Now this is gonna go in the freezer for about 20 minutes before I bake it. What's really fascinating about this dish is that I'm pretty sure it's just based on an oyakodon, which is a chicken and egg rice bowl from Japan. Mostly because the Cockatrice is basically a chicken, and he also uses egg. I like to slice mine up first and then get to work. That looks good to me. Since I'm not gonna need this right away, I'm kind of just getting everything more or less ready. I'm gonna take all of this and put it into here. Like I said, what's fun about this recipe is you can prep a lot of this ahead. And so if you're doing like a dinner party or something, like maybe a delicious and dungeon feast that I might wanna do, which you should totally get subscribed to see, you can make a lot of this ahead of time. And while I was finishing up that chicken, our acorn squash is ready to go. It's nice and tender. This is just gonna get nice and cool, and then we'll saute it up later, but that's ready too. This is the dough that's ready to go into the oven. This has been in the freezer for about 25 minutes or so. This has to bake for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we have to take the beans off to give these some color. So we're gonna do all that. It's kind of a lot of sitting around and waiting. So here is what the crust, well, you can't see it, but the crust is pretty much cooked. The thing is though, is that I really want to pull these out so I can get a little bit of color on the inside of the dough. These have been in there for about 20 minutes and I'm gonna show you what they look like inside. And you can see it looks really nice in there, but it's still a little bit soft. So this now is going to go back in the oven at 350 degrees for about 7 to 8 minutes, just until it gets a little bit of color. And then these are ready to be filled with our oyakodon barley thing. As far as these beans go that were in those pans, you could save these for later, but you don't want to eat them. Just use them only for weighing down pie crust when you need to do it. The last cooked component I have to make for this dish is actually just some barley. Unfortunately, I could only find like the Quaker quick cooking barley near me, so if you can find some normal barley, use that. Honestly, just use steamed rice. I think that would be just as good, if not better. But I find it really interesting that we're gonna try a oyakodon with barley, because I've also made oyakodon with oatmeal, which I really enjoy. In my pot, I have 2 cups of water with just a pinch of salt, and I have 1 cup of the quick cooked barley. This may change depending on what you use, but just use whatever you got. This goes in here, and this just needs to cook for about 10 to 12 minutes until it's absorbed most of the water and the barley's tender. So now we wait. Now, while the barley is cooking over there, we can start sauteing up everything else so it's kind of ready at the same time. I'm using a wok for this because this is what Senshi uses, which is also his weapon and his shield, but we don't need to talk about that. You could also just use a saute pan because if you don't have a wok and you still want to make this, just use a saute pan. But before I actually start cooking stuff, I have to prep a couple more things that I totally forgot about. Now, Senshi also mentioned that he had used the dryad fruit, but the mandrake as well. And the mandrake is kind of interesting because it could very much be daikon, but it also has leaves. So instead, I went for bok choy. I'm going to remove the leaves from the bok choy stem, and then I'm going to slice up these bok choy stems pretty thin, so this way they cook really quickly. The leaves are also just gonna get slightly chopped up, but I'm just gonna cook these a little bit later than the rest of it. So I'll put these in kind of towards the end. Senshi also mentioned there's a depetrification herb. So this way we can break the spell of turning into stone. I chose to steal rosemary from my neighbor's garden. I've actually never used rosemary for oyakodon, but it's chicken and egg and rosemary, so you really can't go wrong. And I think that's a really fun combination for this style of food. Rosemary is also very strong, so we don't need a lot of it. Gonna give this just a quick chop, so this way you don't have giant rosemary stems and leaves. And with that, I think now I have everything ready to go. The rest of this is super straightforward. I'm gonna take some of that chopped chicken thigh that we had made, put it, okay, there we go, now it's hot. Put this in the middle of the wok and just cook this until it's no longer opaque. This is also when I'm gonna throw in the rosemary, so it cooks with the chicken. Hit this with a bit of salt, some ground black pepper. Gonna smoke the house out, of course, as per usual. This cooks very, very quickly. All right, chicken's ready. This is where the daikon stems go in. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not daikon, bok choy stems. And some of the dryad fruit, which is the roasted acorn squash. We're just gonna put a couple of pieces of those. This is gonna be a very interesting dish. I'm really excited to try this. Now we just saute this until everything is nice and tender. The bok choy is nice and tender. This is where I throw in the bok choy leaves. Add a pinch more salt, but we're not gonna cook this too long on here so the leaves don't get overcooked. This is ready to set aside, and we'll finish it right before we plate it all up. Now it's time to actually plate this thing up. Well, mostly. We have to plate this up in two parts, and I'll show you why. First, we're gonna take our beautiful quiche crust. Like, that came out super nice. I'm actually really happy with the color on that. It blind baked really well. It has a nice texture to it. We're gonna set this right in the middle of a small pan because this has to go in the oven. Now, when Senshi made this, he actually put it on a fireside grill, mostly because that's what they have. They don't have an oven in the middle of the dungeon, but we have ovens and I actually don't have a small grill to use. So instead, I'm gonna be packing this with our barley. I think this is gonna be a beautiful dish, to be honest. We can learn a thing or two from anime sometimes. Get this as level as possible. This is what it looks like with the barley so far. Then we're gonna take some of the filling that we had made from our wok and place this right on top. I'm actually gonna fill this up more than Senshi had done. This actually looks like a great fall dish. I think this is gonna be super nice, is what it looks like with all of the filling. So this way, we can take this and this is gonna go in the oven while we make the egg sauce. This is just gonna sit in there until it gets nice and warm for 4 or 5 minutes at 425. Now the egg sauce is super interesting because it's just an egg. He takes the Cockatrice egg out of a backpack and he just makes sauce out of it. But that doesn't really work in the real world. The closest thing I could think of is maybe hollandaise. But the reason why I'm not going to make a hollandaise is because there is a hollandaise sauce made in the show later on, so we'll probably make that dish with hollandaise. For this one, we're gonna take a little bit of a different approach. I'm cracking 2 eggs into this small bowl, and then I'm going to add a couple of tablespoons of heavy cream. This way, when we go to cook these eggs over a slow and low temperature, we'll hopefully get a nice custardy egg that we're gonna use to top everything with. But make sure that these are whisked really, really well. The other thing too is you're mostly starting with a cold pan. You don't want this pan to be hot at all when the eggs go in. Otherwise, you're going to start getting too much color on the eggs. And since we want a sauce, you want it at a lower temp. Pop this right in here now. Season it with just a bit of salt, and I'm gonna start stirring this just until we get some nice egg curds. It's still gonna almost look like scrambled eggs, to be honest, and not like an egg sauce, but this is the one way I could think of where maybe we can get a nice creamy egg without making a hollandaise. That's it, done. But also, we don't wanna leave these in the pan because the pan is still warm and these eggs will continue to cook. So this is going to come right out into a bowl. Our cockatrice rice has been in the oven for about 5 minutes at that 425, and it looks gorgeous. It got a little bit more color on it from before after baking it a second time, but that thing looks so freaking cool. Now we're just gonna top this with our egg sauce, and this is ready to go. This is such an interesting dish to me. I would probably pay quite a bit at a restaurant if I were served this dish. Look at that, that's gorgeous. I'm gonna finish this with just a bit of rock salt. Well, it's not rock salt, it's just like thick cut salt. And just a very, very small crack of black pepper. Just a little bit right on top of the egg. And there, my friends, is my version of the Cockatrice cleaner brick dish from, this is my version of this dish from Delicious in Dungeon. This is the second dish that I've made from Delicious in Dungeon, but my goal is to make as many as possible before season 2. I'm hoping to do at least 10 of these. I'm actually more excited to dive into this one than I was the dungeon pie. And if you want to see the dungeon pie, I'll leave a link in the description below. Senshi, how is this? I think it's gonna be delicious. I'm just gonna dig in, you know? First, we're gonna try it without the cleaner brick. Just gonna get a full, like that's so nice looking. And it's a significant amount of food too. I got as many layers as possible. I've dropped egg on the counter. Cheers. Okay, listen, the barley is really nice with it. I do think rice would be amazing in this as well. It doesn't taste like a traditional oyakodon because it doesn't have the same flavor profiles, but it tastes more Thanksgiving than it does anything else, if that makes sense. With the rosemary and the chicken and the eggs and the vegetables. It's just really easy to eat. It's very comforting in a lot of ways. The egg is super creamy too. I know it's on egg sauce, but this egg is perfect with this. Now, we're gonna take some of this cleaner brick. Oh my God, look at the flaky layers. That looks fantastic. Now, admittedly, in the show, the cleaner brick wasn't delicious, but I bet this is going to be. Cheers. It completely changes the flavor of the dish. Oh my God. I would easily pay about 12 bucks for this at a local bakery if they offered it. And honestly, if you sold this in a small shop, I would have no idea the idea came from an anime. This is what I like to see. But if you want to be more like Senshi, you can check out Cooking with Chaos in the description below. It's my brand new infinite recipe card system that allows you to play with your food in unparalleled ways. I've been preaching this for most of my career here on YouTube, and I truly think you guys can create something amazing with this infinite recipe card system. If you want to check that out, I'll leave the link in the description below. And right now, anyone who gets the first edition is going to get free stuff. You're going to get free expansion pack cards if you order the first edition pack. My name is Chef PK. This is Gandalf, and remember, keep playing with your food.